Hi, our next speaker is Chatterjee, founder of the Joy of Data, as he unveils data maps, models for data-informed growth in product management. With over a decade in data science, Joy's journey from startups in Silicon Valley to collaborations with global giants like Mercedes and FedEx has centered on leveraging data for superior product development. Join him to discover how data maps empower organizations to harness data for informed growth with touch of joy. So we're gonna get a touch of joy now.
Hi. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi guys. How's everybody feeling? It's Friday. I can see the energy through the roof. Yeah, so first of all, thank you for coming. Friday, 4:30, I thought it would be 2 people, but you know, I'm happy there's at least a few. So let's talk about data and what's happening. I think oh, there you go, remote. So yes, my name is Joy. I started this company called the Joy of Data because, as you can see, I'm not that creative, but hey, we'll just work with it, right? So let's start with who am I and really why I'm here. And whenever I have this question, I've been trying to think about, you know, a lot of people ask, what's the one thing that you're here for? And I couldn't find anything other than food. I think that's really why I am here, right? The goal is always to be as close to food as possible. And these are the only 2 images where I found where I'm actually that happy. So that's me. I'm Joy. I love food. But on the side, I've also been working with these companies, as you see, some big ones, some small ones. And the benefit of working with all these companies is you get to see all the different problems and issues and also the things that they do really well, right? So in this sort of ecosystem and having learned what I learned over the last 10 years, I started this company called the Joy of Data. And the idea really is, how do we help other cross-functional teams? Because inside data, everybody kind of knows what we're doing. Everybody understands language. What we don't understand is how to communicate with cross-functional or other teams, right? And so this is really what I'm going to cover today. But before we get into it, let's start with something very simple, right? So let's ask ourselves, today, how do product teams make decisions, right? Because we hear a lot of this data-driven decision-making, et cetera. But let's start small. How are they doing that today? And I've noticed that there are kind of these patterns, and so I put them in these 3 buckets, right? There's no data, which kind of doesn't exist, right? So as you can see, whenever it comes to taking decisions, it's mostly intuition-driven. Opinions, you know, I've done it before like that, et cetera. This is how we've done it in the past. No data insights, no engagement, no data-driven development. Kind of unrealistic, right? What's more realistic is the middle one, which is there's some data, which means sometimes you get partial insights from the data, but it's not really a collaboration. You're not working closely together. That's where you want to go with like lots of data, which is you want to get alignment between product teams, data teams, and you want to have this sort of development schedule that says, yeah, we're aligned and we're synced with exactly what the data is saying, what the product wants, what the sales wants, et cetera, right? So this is interesting when you think about it because we claim to be data-driven, but we're not, right? And a simple question is, why do we need to be data-driven, right? Like, what would we benefit from? And so let's ask ourselves, when we build features, right, how efficient are we in building these features? So let's go into some studies, and actually this one is quite extensive because it covered about 22,000 ideas over like a decade. Did, as you can see, a simple A/B test where there was an existing system, there was a system with feature X, and they wanted to find out what percentage of your ideas are creating value. And as you can see, it's not doing so well. 1/3 of your ideas are actually successful in improving the key metric. And when you look at this, you think, you know, maybe they're just startups or smaller companies that don't know what they're doing and they'll figure it out. And then I'll show you this, and you go, wait, hang on, Netflix? Microsoft? These companies are doing really well. But what's shocking is that 1/3 of their ideas or 1/10 of their ideas are actually giving value. And this is where you go, wait, that doesn't sound right, right? I mean, does that just mean we're really poor, or we're just doing too many things and it's not working out? So let's address it, right? Like, why are the numbers so low, and how can we do better, right? And to think about this, we have to go into the simple, let's take, we did 30%, right? So let's take a theoretical point of view, which is you do 3 things, and one of them turns out well, right? And you do that 3 different times, and you're like, hey, I did 9 things, but 3 things came out well. But that's theoretical, isn't it? Because the reality is, sometimes you get 1 thing that's great, sometimes you get none, sometimes you get 2, right? And what's the problem here? The problem here is that we need to learn from what we're building, right? You need to know what went well, what didn't go well, so that in the next iteration you can say, okay, I'll improve on that. And if we start to think about this in the product and the whole roadmap of data product, what does that really look like? It looks like this, right? There's a strategy, there's a broad product strategy. There's metrics that people care about. We build features on those. And then, of course, there's the data and the analytics that sort of comes in. And when you look at this, you think, yeah, that makes sense. This is kind of something I've seen along the lines of development. But the most important piece here is the feedback of that data back to the strategy. And how often does that happen? How often are people looking at the analytics and then saying, I will take that insight and cater or amend what my initial strategy was? And this is what gives rise to outcome-driven road mapping. This is what we call, like, how are you learning from what you're building? You understood something, and then you took that knowledge and baked it into the strategy to get better the next time. And this is how you actually then build better features, right? So that's great. I mean, we have a plan, right? But before we talk about how the plan works, let's see, how does that look like today, right? I'm from a data background. I've worked with product teams. I've worked with, let's say, sales teams and business development teams. And how exactly is it that we collaborate today, right? So I wanted to start off with some self-reflection, right? And that would involve the data-driven elephant in the room, right? We've all heard this. We're a data-driven company, collect millions of data points every day, clean it, analyze it, turn it into actionable insights, and we just throw it away. Because, you know, the logo needs to be bigger, right? So we're all guilty of this. And that's fine. It just shows us where we can sort of improve. But then, now that we know what we're not doing great, let's talk about how we work with product, for example. So if we ask ourselves, when is product really reaching out to us? When does someone from the other team come and say, hey, I need this, or, you know, we need this for the particular roadmap? So if you were to think about this as this sort of path to feature launch, these are all the stage. And again, I apologize for butchering. It's an oversimplification, right? But let's look at it. So there's discovery at the very bottom, right? So product people will go and say, hey, I want a particular feature. Let's go into discovery. Let's figure out how to build this thing. Then they'll go to the feature design folks and say, okay, so this is what the idea is. Can you sort of build a half-baked prototype? And then we'll, you know, go from there. Then data comes in. And then there's development, testing, etc., all the way up to feature launch. What's interesting is that if we keep most of this the same and just sort of flip feature design in data, right? That already gives us a big benefit. And I'll show you how, right? But the idea is, what if the design was data-driven, right? Because if you already come to us half-baked with an idea of the feature, there's only so much we can give you, right? But if it's like, hey, I would like to build a feature that looks like this, but we haven't sort of designed it yet, tell us all the different aspects of data and data sources that we can look into to build this feature, right? And so, as you can see, this is already something very simple that we can do today without the use of resources, without the use of templates that I'll get into, which is quite powerful if you think about it, right? And that's really interesting, because if we think about all of the suggestions we went so far, like how to be data-driven, how to put data before design, what you realize is a lot of this is for organizations with existing data frameworks. So I saw a lot of you nod your heads, right? Which means you know these processes, you've done these before, and the reason for that is you have existing processes in your company or in your organization. And I think that's great, but there are a lot of companies who are like, I don't even know where to start. I mean, what is this data framework thing you mentioned, and how do I encapsulate it into something tangible that I understand what you're talking about, right? So that's really where I sort of come in, right? That if you want to build your own data framework to be a bit more proactive, we built something called data radar maps. It's a simple spider map for most of us, but the way we use this is something that we're going to dive into, right? So as you can see, there's different aspects to it. It's a positional graph, which tells you the state of your framework today. And the different aspects are organization, taxonomy, tools and processes, fluency, and utilization. Now, I'm not going to go into all of them. It's quite a lot, right? I'll just show you some bits and pieces. And as you can see, we're going to focus mostly on the organization and the utilization part. And I'm going to give you a real-life example that tells you how to use this thing or why this thing is even relevant, right? So let's start with organization, right? Simplest, low-hanging fruit. What exactly are we talking about? Why do we care about this? And simplest way to think about it is, well, we care about how efficient your data organization is, right? And what that really means in terms of what are your data sources, your architectures, and databases. The way we do this is we'll run some workshops with you, and we ask you a few questions. Now, I've put these questions in sort of each of these aspects. As you can see, 10 questions, let's say 0 to 5 for each question. Basically trying to understand where you fall in this, let's say, ecosystem of organization. Now, when you see that, you go, well, that's not great. Clearly, high score is 50, we're at 20. That's pretty bad, isn't it? So here's the most interesting part about this map. The map is not dedicated to building the coolest framework in data. No. It's designed to build what you care about, right? What your company cares about, and what the organization really emphasizes on. So then what we do is we say, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to put another slice of relevancy in this data. And you tell us which of these things actually matter to you, or they don't. High, low, right? And we will only take the high ones. Because we built what you care about in the company. So if you don't care about, I don't know, data processing pipelines, for example. No, actually, you do care about data processing pipelines. Then we don't score you on that, right? Because at this point in your company, you need to focus on something else, and that's really what we're going to score you on. And that's one way of sort of showing you, A, how well you're doing on your data organization. But here's the kicker, right? When we do this, you know what other insight sort of comes to surface is where you're not doing so well. So if someone says, that's great, can you just tell me right now, where do I need to focus on? You can see, of the things you care about, you're not doing so well on data processing pipelines and quality standards and classification levels. Now, this is actionable, right? Because now it's not just a pretty number or a graph, but you can go in and say, OK, so clearly the organization prioritizes this, but we're not putting effort into this. So that's where you can say, all right, the next sprint or the next sort of quarter, this is where we'll focus on. And this is the kind of stuff that we will enlighten you and then share with you as we go through all these different aspects, right? To then say, it's not just something that you're doing as a sort of house cleaning thing, but also something that you can get recommendations, suggestions, and actionable sort of items from that. So we talked about organization, right? Not the most fun subject, but let's bring you guys back a little. Let's do a little game. Let's do 2 truths and 1 lie. Everybody's familiar with this game? OK, I hope so. If not, essentially there will be 3 statements. 2 of them are true, 1 of them are not. Number 1, in 2020, the ratio of unique to replicated data was 1 to 9. Second one says, data scientists like us spend about 80% of their time pre-processing data. And yeah, it's not the most fun part. And the last one is currently 25% of our data goes unused for analytics. Any guesses? How many of you think it's number 2? Because it's quite painful, to be honest, pre-processing data. How many people have number 3? Okay, a lot of, wow, okay. So that's good. I mean, you guys are clearly a brilliant crowd. So I'll give you this. That's not true. Can someone think where that number is? Like, what percentage of data is actually being unused for analytics? 80 or higher. That's very close, right? It's 73%, right? And that's insane. We're taking all of this information and we're just letting it sit in a basement, right? So why is that? Why is 73% of the data just going unused? And when you think about that, I mean, the natural progression of thought is, so why is utilization so low? So can we please talk about utilization and how do we encapsulate that, right? So let's do this. We'll talk about utilization as, of course, we're trying to measure how the data is being used, the effectiveness of insights and value, but let's give you a simple template. What you really need to think about are 3 tenets, right? Engagement, time to insights, knowledge share in the aspect of utilization. So let's get into engagement. Simple. We ask the stakeholders, how engaged are they with the data or insights? How often are they actually interacting with that? How happy are they with the dashboards? And as you can imagine, if they're not happy, they're probably not using that insight or that dashboard, right? And this is an accumulation of design, access, responsibility boundaries, a lot of that. But you're really asking, like, how do you feel? What's your experience? And if you get a marker that says it's red, that's where you need to address and dive down and say, what is the problem, right? Then there's time to insights. This is pretty simple. From the moment a stakeholder says, I would like an insight for X feature or X metric, to the time that stakeholder actually gets that particular dashboard or insight, what's that time? Is it a day, 2 days, 6 months? Because after 3 months, that person has just lost interest, right? So that number is important to make sure that number is kept as low as possible to ensure that people are actually using the data because they're getting it as soon as, or at the earliest that they request it. And the final one is knowledge share. I mean, this is something every one of us know that it's one thing to just show a dashboard and an insight, and it's a completely different thing for that particular user to use it in their daily life because they don't really understand what's going on, right? There's something below the surface that you need to then communicate and say, actually, what the graph represents, or what the graph is trying to tell you is this, and the way we achieve this is by that. So we basically gather a list of items that say, what are the parts of data, or what are the parts of these dashboards that you don't understand, and how can we help you there, right? Because we're the experts, and we can try to distill that information in a way that you understand without having to go through a data science degree, right? So again, this is very theoretical, right? Why don't we go and say, that's great, you know, I understand there's a spider graph, blah, 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 blah. The real question is, how do clients really use it? And if I were to use this tomorrow, what does that really look like? So 2 use cases I'm going to cover here. The first one is, it's a timeline for you. So we do this, and let's say at Q1 2023, you are here. And the best part is we enable you to do this. It's not like you have to come to us every time, and we'll do this for you, and we charge you. It's more like we're enabling you to build this out as a sort of sanitary check every quarter. So you do this in Q1, and you say, OK, then we ran it again in Q4, and it sort of evolved, right? Because we understood those pain points. We understood where we need to improve on, and we then built a new one. So your tools and processes got better, organization got better. Hey, your utilization even jumped up. And what's really interesting here is that this is a dynamic graph, right? You can't just compete all the levels. Because if you think about that particular thing right there, what happened there? You had a lot of data fluency, but now you built these new tools, this organization, you have a taxonomy, people are using more dashboards. Automatically, the level of fluency in your organization went down because all these new sort of tools and aspects came in. So you need to take care of that, right? Because you can't just build better and stronger tools and not educate people on how to use those better and stronger tools, right? And so that's one. Then let's talk about connecting to product. And this is really where it's powerful and how it comes in is we need an example for this, right? So let's say we have a client that makes an audiobook app, right? And from the product side, the way they sort of understand how to optimize that particular product is by driver trees. So this is a simple, again, pardon me for the oversimplification, but yeah, it's a simple KPI tree that says monthly active users is what we care about, and the way to track that is involve all these different features, or sorry, all these different metrics. And for the purpose of this exercise, because we only spoke about this particular segment of the graph, we're going to only limit ourselves to organization and utilization. And how can we use that to understand what's going wrong? So what usually happens is, in a scenario where they have the KPI driver tree and the product stakeholders come to us and say, these are exactly the dashboards, the analytics, and the metrics that we care about. Can you provide these to us so that I can then fulfill my purpose of tracking? Let's assume that that happens, right? The green ones are essentially data sources that have been fulfilled or actually delivered to that particular stakeholder. And it's very clear from this picture to understand that it's not complete, right? There's parts that are missing. What's interesting is this completely relies and stays inside the product ecosystem. We don't know this graph. We don't work with this graph. What we work with is some kind of way to figure out why people are not using the data, the insights we're giving them. And so when you run this particular radar map, you see, maybe you get something like that, or you see, hey, the data is organized. We're doing everything we can to sort of, clean the data, process the data. ETL is running just perfectly fine, but utilization is super low, right? And that immediately sort of triggers you to ask what's going on and why is that particular aspect so low. And this is where you can then sort of talk to the product team members and say, we noticed that something's missing, right? We don't know what, but we can clearly see the utilization is not as we want it to be. And that's when they can say, yeah, because, well, I want to use this metric tree, but conversion rate is missing, returning users are missing, and also they're not packaged together, right? Maybe you've given them all of these things, but they're all in different dashboards, different access protocols. That's not easy. So that's one way where you can say, okay, now we have sort of a framework to understand how our stakeholders, whether it's a product team, sales team, will benefit from the data and essentially the insights that we give them, right? Because it's not just about giving it to them, it's about making sure they have everything they need to use that in their sort of daily operations. And then when you do this, of course, yeah, I mean, the obvious thing is you'll provide those insights. What's going to happen? Your framework is going to evolve. Excellent. But what now you start realizing is, there are other aspects to this as well, right? And of course there are, which is there's a point of fluency in tools and processes. And a simple example of this is, there's so many different tools out there. And you want to really decide what's the best tool for your organization. And the way to sort of understand this is then run basically these sort of workshops with them and say, we've been using Amplitude for a while. How do you feel about Amplitude? What are the pain points of Amplitude? And then if there are certain pain points of Amplitude that you can resolve with another tool, maybe Mixpanel, right? That's when you can say, is it enough to transition into a new tool? Because the tool is great. We're happy with the integration and the pipelines and all of the performance is great. Utilization is low. And that's basically it. I think that's where I'm sort of going to end my talk and take questions, because the idea is we want to build sort of a data strategy for these product teams, because then when we work with artifacts like these, there's a channel of communication between these two camps, right? That you can understand what's going wrong, why are people not using the data, why are people not that excited about data, why do people not have access to the data sets or the data dashboards that we're giving them. And yeah, that's basically me. And yeah, you can actually scan that for that's me. But yeah, that's essentially it. You can get in touch and yeah.
Okay, so do we have any questions?
Great.
It's a small crowd. And okay, I'll give you the certificate for presenting.
Oh, thank you so much.
Sorry, for presenting on Data Science Conference.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your
Thank you,
time.
Joy.